Hello everybody, this is Isaiah, and today I will be presenting my Snake Plus project to you guys. And so this will be kind of a longer video, so I guess I will kind of start out with a demonstration just so you can kind of see what the game is like, and then I'm actually going to go straight into looking at how it works, and that way you'll have just kind of a visual idea of what's going on when you're actually looking at the code. And then I will end it off with a second demonstration where I show kind of the second part of the game. So first things first, we will open it up. This is the load screen, of course. I did actually try and go after kind of a retro arcade game type style, so I wanted very simplistic graphics. I wanted something that was very easy on the eye, low in color, etc. And so I actually think I kind of hit hit my goal there pretty perfectly. I even actually went out of my way to create this snake graphic myself. And obviously this is just a snake with a bit of food that it's about to eat. So I think that all kind of came together very well. Obviously, this game is Snake Plus, so it's just going to be, it's more than just your regular single player snake game. Um, and so in that case, before we kind of show the extra features for this game, I'm actually going to show you guys the single player mode, which is the very basic, easy to understand mode. Okay, so like I said, first things first, we will run a single player game. So you can see there's sound implemented. It is a little bit loud, but that's just because I have my volume turned up. So you can see it's pretty simplistic. You go after the green food bit. Once you get it, it increases your score. You can see the score counter increases on the top left. The goal obviously is not to hit any of the edges or to hit yourself. In that case, it is a game over. And you can see it kind of goes at a reasonable pace. The player just controls it with the arrow keys, so it's pretty simplistic. And then you can see that once we run into a wall, for example, it actually does a game over sound, tells us it's game over, and in this case it was actually a new high score, so we will submit one just for the sake of demonstration. So you can kind of type in the name, whatever you want, hit submit. It submits it to the leaderboards, which I will actually show later once I kind of explain how that all works. So that is kind of the general idea of how the snake game looks. Now let's go take a look at how it all works. So obviously everything starts out with the startup menu here. Once this loads, you can kind of just see this is a simple background with some simple text boxes. And then and I guess I should preface this with the fact that I'm using Windows Forms through Visual Studio, of course. This is programmed in C Sharp, which I'm somewhat familiar with. I also just do really enjoy programming in Visual Studio with C Sharp. I think it's very clean and easy. And so I ended up choosing WinForms. I was a little worried at first that Windows Forms would be too old of like a graphical software, but it actually ended up working pretty much perfectly for this project. So as I was saying, this is the startup menu. This is the first form. It's very basic. You just have text boxes. Here we actually have a picture box where I inserted a transparent image of a snake, which I, as I said, designed myself. And you can see that each of these buttons has like their own events and stuff, such as when you hover over and unhover over it, just to make the application seem somewhat alive to the users. So that's pretty much the main rundown of the startup menu. The code behind it's pretty basic. It's just events, and then, oh, in this case, you'll change the color, etc. So now let's take a look at the single player form. So you can see here, this is the single player form. This is actually always here for the game. It's just hidden until it needs to be used, or until the game is over. And here you can see these are simple text boxes, and then here, this is actually the main function of the game and why everything works, and that is the picture box. And what makes the picture box so special is the fact that you can paint in it, and these paint events can be specifically controlled by a game timer. So every time that timer ticks, or ticks every 200 milliseconds, it's actually going to trigger a refresh of the picture box, which will end up causing a new frame to be displayed, because once the picture box refreshes, a paint event will occur, and then it will paint everything in that moment that it's supposed to paint. So there's kind of a lot to explain, but it's a pretty short form. I mean, it's only about 300 lines of code. Everything starts out with the initialize component. You can see we initialize the sounds, we load the sounds. Obviously, we have a lot of different variables that get initialized too, but I just did that in the global area. So, 1 second. Everything is started with this init game, which is actually an event for this form, which keeps track of whenever the visibility of the form itself changes. So once it changes, it triggers this event, which then tests, is the form visible? And if that is true, then what we're going to do is we're going to start the timer, or this is the game sound, and then we start the timer, then we initialize the snake, and we generate the food, which you can see here. The underlying data structure that this program uses is a linked list. So this is probably a good time to talk about that. And you can see here init snake, we clear it first, just in case this is the second iteration of the game ever since we opened the application. And then you can see we add a new bit, which is a specific class I created for this. And essentially a bit is just a pixel that has an X value, which is its position on the x-axis of the picture box, and then a y, which is the position on the y-axis, and then a direction, which is specifically for the snake bits, which allows us to keep track of which direction this bit is supposed to be going in the next paint box refresh type thing. So it's pretty simple. It's just an easier way of keeping track of x and y positions for the form. Well, let's go back real quick so you can see I'm essentially just initializing it at this exact position with those directions every time. And then here you can see I generate one piece of food, and in the single player version I specifically only allow one food to be generated at a time. There was no specific reason for doing this other than the fact that I want kind of a longer game, and so with less food, the longer you're going to have to survive to get farther, etc. Not like that's an important detail. But moving on, now that we kind of know how the game starts, the next thing to explain is the every time the game has a tick. So you can see the timer started once the visibility is shown. So then, find it. Every time this timer 1 down here ticks, it's actually going to trigger this game tick event, which is going to cause the move snake method to be called, and then the collision check method to be called. And then finally, once we have the move snake and the collision check values figured out, we can refresh the picture box, which displays all of the new information caused by the game tick. So you can see, for example, in this move snake, it's a pretty simple function. It just takes the lead direction, which is the most recently pressed direction by the arrow keys, and then it takes that and actually implements it into the new direction that the snake will be heading. So you can see essentially what it does is for each snake bit, first it'll start with the lead direction, and then it will insert that lead direction into the first snake bit, and then it will take the old direction from that snake bit and then insert that into the following snake bit. So it's just kind of like a chain reaction. It's nothing too crazy. So once that is finished, we now have the new x and y values of all of the new snake bits, and then we also have the directions corrected. And so after that, you will see the paint box being refreshed, which will paint the snake. You can see we use this graphics, this pen master and brush master, and then we draw a rectangle, and then we fill in the rectangle, and then that creates the snake. And then same kind of dealio with the paint food thing here. And then this is also right here triggered whenever a key is pressed down, and if that key is left, for example, it'll change the new direction to left, etc., etc. And I guess I did skip over collision check, but this one's also pretty simple. So every time a game tick occurs, it's actually going to check for collision. You can see it checks if the snake head is touching any of the food bits. If it does, we're going to grow the snake, we're going to increase the score, and then generate food, because we have to generate a new one. Otherwise, if it is touching a border, or if it collides with a border, it's going to be a game over. Otherwise, if it collides with itself, obviously it's a game over. And you can see this for each loop is allowing me to essentially check that by iterating through each bit in the linked list. So let's kind of look at game over. seconds. Okay, so and then the final part for this kind of single player game is the game over, which gets called whenever a collision occurs. So we're going to play the sound, we're going to stop the timer, we're going to change your score to red, we're going to make the game over sign, this thing visible, because as I said, it's always there. And we are actually going to open up the data access object, and this actually allows us to access the database that's connected to everything. And then what we're going to do is call the get last place method. And then essentially what I'm checking is to see if the current score or the final score of this game is higher than the last place score on our leaderboard. And then if so, we got to update the leaderboards. So in that case, we would call new high score, which then causes the leaderboard to be refreshed essentially. And then otherwise, we start this game over pause timer, the second timer, which doesn't get used until this exact moment, which essentially just gives the user about 3 seconds to kind of take it all in since they lost, and then it will close out of the application. So this video is already getting pretty long, so I'm going to try and speed things up a little bit, but essentially that is how everything works for the single player form. The next thing I'm going to kind of glance at is the leaderboard and database type stuff, which is a little bit complicated. Alright, so first things first, with this whole database thing, this was kind of the big part of my data structure thing, or this was the big part of my program that actually did use data structures, because obviously linked lists is a pretty simple concept, so I didn't want that to be my only database type structure, or data structure in my project. I'm completely, or was completely unfamiliar with databases and stuff. I had never really worked with them before this project, so I did definitely need a tutorial. And it was actually this kind of like series of videos by this YouTuber that allowed me to create the project. And so I just kind of followed his tutorials, and while it is somewhat unrelated to what I did, it gave me all the information I needed to know to make a working database. And so in these tutorials, he actually recommends using this Nmap, I guess, server software. It's very simple. You just can go to the internet and download the software. It's about 1 gigabyte. It's not too bad. And then, like I said, it's very simple. So once you open up the app for the first time, it's going to take you to this screen. All you got to do is hit Start Servers, and then it will turn on the Apache and the MySQL servers. So very, very simple. Mind you, this is a local host, so it's not something you can use through a network, you can only use it through a local area network, essentially. And so, like I was saying, it's a MySQL server, so it's very simple. And when you do, in fact, get the software, all you have to do is kind of go to Preferences. Here you are going to see the port number and stuff like that. It will also show you the password for the username and password. And that will allow you to kind of connect to the software, or to the database itself. So you had to start out with this connection string. You set the data source to localhost, the port to whatever the port is, those. Then you have to make sure you have a database. And then through all of that, you're actually able to successfully connect to the database using this MySQL connection. And then you can use MySQL command to essentially do anything that you can do with the SQL language. So it is very simple. We're going to actually open up this web start page. This is where you can actually view everything. And like I said, this is localhost. You'll just go to Tools, phpMyAdmin. Then, so you can see this is actually one of my databases. It's this leaderboard. And this is one of my tables, which is this high score. And then so here you can see I have a database that contains entries that have a name, score, rank, and then ID. The ID was specifically implemented just so it's something unique that will differentiate, as you kind of need for all databases. And then the rank is also supposed to be unique anyways, just because we don't want anybody to rank the same on the leaderboard. And then you can see it keeps track of score and the name, as I said. So it's pretty basic. It's nothing too special, but it was definitely kind of difficult to figure out. Because I did need about 100 lines of code here in different methods just to make this work. So you can see, here's this get last place method. You can see we're using this command in order to get last place, and then we just return that. And then, for example, get database entries gets all of them, and so we use this to get all of them. And then we just return that. And here we have update DB entries, and this is the new score and new name that we get from the high score submission thing that pops up when you do get a new high score. And then here you can see we are deleting one of them, and then eventually, eventually we actually modify the entries after we deleted the last place one, and then we refresh the database entries, in which we insert all of the new database ones. So essentially, there's only ever going to be 5 database entries. It will just delete the last place one every time there is a new one, just to keep things simple and easy to use. So yeah, that is basically the full rundown of the database. As I said, I use a database access object here. And then we also do have the database entry, which kind of just allows me to store them into a list a little bit easier here, as you can see, as I try to iterate through them. So that's also a pretty simple class that I just use on the side. And then, obviously here, this is where we display all of the database entries. And then the leaderboard form is actually initialized and owned by the startup form. So no matter what, the leaderboard form is going to be constantly updating as it changes. So you can see there's this display database entries, which gets called anytime there's a new update for the database entries. You can see we have the refresh leaderboard, which gets the new ones, and then we obviously display them here. So this part is also pretty basic. It's just me displaying what I have stored in the database. And here's kind of what it looks like. Nothing too interesting here. And then that leaves us with the multiplayer version, which this was actually my favorite part of this whole program. It was probably the most challenging. Well, the database part was actually really challenging for me, but this was also very difficult to kind of understand and figure out properly. It is 500 lines of code, so it wasn't easy, but it is more or less just a copy and paste from the single player version. It's just a little bit more compact and just a little bit more going on. There are a few more rules with this multiplayer version that makes it interesting. And so, for example, just like in the single player version, you have a picture box that gets updated every time the game timer ticks. You have player 1, you have player 2. Player 1 uses WASD, player 2 uses the arrow keys. But what makes this game different is it's actually, you win based off of how long you survive, not based off of how many bits you've eaten. So, normally the strategy here would be just to not eat any bits, but what makes that, but what I did to combat that specifically was actually every time you eat 5 bits, you increase your opponent's speed by something like 10%. So if you get up to, 40 bits, you're going to increase your opponent's speed by 80%. So it can really make a big game changer. But you also have to keep in mind that as you eat more bits, you're going to get bigger, which also makes it harder not to lose or run into yourself. So, it's actually a very well balanced part of the game. Like I said, it was definitely my favorite. I even played it with some other people. Like, I had somebody playing WASD while I was doing the arrow keys, and that was actually probably the most fun I've had doing any of my projects. So it was definitely enjoyable. But all in all, that is my full project. It's nothing too crazy, but it is certainly an enjoyable game to play for a couple times. So I will give you guys one last demonstration. First, I want to open up the leaderboards. You can see here that the demonstration one did in fact get put in there. I also always have the newest ties go below the older ones. Since Victory was here before, I just have demonstration placed below it. And so now we will actually do the multiplayer version. You can see there's the game begin sound. The main worry here for me was that considering 2 people are inputting keys at the same time, I figured it might be a little bit slow or laggy, but it actually works perfectly, weirdly enough, so I'm pretty pleased there. But as you can see, it's pretty basic. It's really no different. But I will pause here for a second just to show you what it's like later in the game. Alright, so I fast forward in the game a little bit. I just want to show you what happens when you collect 5. So you can see we have the speed up sound, and now the snake on the left is actually going considerably quicker. So, like I said, it is a pretty fun game, but there isn't too much to it here. And you can see it properly ends here as well. So that is, all in all, my snake game. I felt like everything turned out really well. I was actually surprised that I was able to do everything that I planned on doing, things such as the database and the multiplayer version. They all ended up working out better than I thought. I mean, the database worked perfectly. The multiplayer was actually really fun. Um, I also had a lot of challenges with just figuring out how Windows Forms work and how to paint stuff graphically, but of course that I eventually got past that hurdle. So it was a very enjoyable game. I guess thank you very much for watching.